I imagine that everyone here has at least a few people in their life that they find it hard to trust. Particularly somebody that when they do something kind to you, you kind of give them a side eye. Like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? There are people in our lives that it's hard to trust. When they do something kind for you, you're thinking, what do they have in it for them? What do they want from you? What's the catch? What's the hook? There's people in our lives that we find it hard to trust. That it feels like that our relationship with them, be this a neighbor, a coworker, classmate, our relationship with them feels transactional. If they do something kind, they're looking for something in return. Now, it can be easy for us to judge the people in our lives like that with condemnation, but you know what Jesus says, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. We ourselves can be transactional in relationships. Giving, not just to give, but giving to get. That's true, of course, in our horizontal relationships. But for a moment today, at the beginning of the sermon, I want us to think about how we do that vertically in our relationship with the Lord. You see, we as Christians can be transactional with God. If we do the right thing, we expect to get the right thing in response. If we do the right thing for God, we expect God to do right by us in the ways that we think that means. If we obey God, we're expecting God to bless us. If we keep obeying, then God owes us. If we're brutally honest, I think most of us at times think about our relationship with God in those terms. If I obey God, then he will bless me the way that I want him to bless me. Here's the hard truth. Sometimes when you obey God, not only does he not bless you the way that you want to be blessed, but sometimes things get worse. You might see behind me that that's the title of our sermon today, When Obeying God Makes Things Worse. Now, I want to be clear. What I'm not saying is when obeying God isn't the right thing to do. That's not the title of the sermon. The title of the sermon isn't when obeying God makes things so awful that you should just give up. No, that's not the title either. The title is not when obeying God makes things worse and they never get better. That's not the title either. But the reality is, sometimes in the short run, when we follow God's will on our lives, things do not necessarily always get easier. Sometimes they get harder. Sometimes obeying God makes things worse. I've experienced this in different ways in my life at different times. And what I'm getting ready to say, I want to say very carefully at the risk of offending every single person in this room. About 4 years ago, the Lord called Celia and I to come out to West Charlotte. Now, bear with me. Some of you might know where this is going. And while the last 4 years have been unbelievably rich and so wonderful in so many ways, the relationships that we've built with you all in this room and others beyond, it's been wonderful. And we have benefited so much from the love and the care and the kindness from people in this room. And it's been so wonderful, and we wouldn't change it for the world, and we're not going anywhere. And also, the last 4 years of our life have been uniquely challenging. Not all ministry related. There's just been a lot of challenges. And so from one vantage point, Celia and I could look at our lives and say, we obeyed God 4 years ago, calling us to a new mission, and things got worse. What we're going to see today through the story of Moses is that even when that happens, there is mercy and blessing in it because God is with us. When obeying God makes things worse. Well, just a quick review. We're looking at the story of Exodus. And in this story, God's people, the Israelites, they are enslaved to Egypt. And the Egyptians are brutally oppressing them. It's a horrible, horrible experience and reality for the Egyptians going on for hundreds of years. God hears their cry, raises up Moses to be the leader, to be the redeemer and deliverer of God's people. God sends Moses to Pharaoh. Now, Moses has a sense that this is a hard call. And so he wrestles with God. He argues with God. For 2 whole chapters, he argues with God because he doesn't want to go because he knows it's going to be hard. Finally, though, he obeys and he goes to Pharaoh. That's where we pick up today. Moses had a sense that things might get worse, and they definitely did. What I want to do today as we look at this passage is I want us to not just see, in total how things got worse, but I want you to appreciate all of the different stages of things getting worse. It tends to get worse and worse and worse and worse throughout the course of this passage. For example, look at the first verse. Later, Moses and Aaron went in and say to Pharaoh, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival for me in the wilderness." But Pharaoh responded, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him by letting Israel go? I don't know the Lord. And besides, I will not let Israel go." Okay, not a great start to the conversation. Immediately, it goes poorly. And as we talked about last week, we've had a sense of what Moses is carrying into this conversation. I'm sure you can relate. You've probably had very difficult conversations that you knew you had to have with somebody, be it a friend, a family member, a coworker, a boss, someone that works for you, an employee. You know what it's like to come into a hard conversation where your entire body is tense. And perhaps you're replaying in your mind all of the different things that could happen in this conversation, all the things that could go bad. And then you enter into the conversation. Sometimes, many times, it goes better than expected. Sometimes it goes worse. That's where Moses was as he comes into this conversation. "Would you please let my people go?" God says. Pharaoh says no. They don't give up. Verse 3, they answered, "The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go on a 3-day trip into the wilderness so that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God, or else he may strike us with plague or sword." They made one request. Pharaoh says no. They made a second request. Pharaoh says no. The king of Egypt says, "Moses and Aaron, why are you causing the people to neglect their work? Get to your labor." But Pharaoh also said, "Look, the people of the land are so numerous, and you would stop them from their labor." God commanded Moses, "Go and talk to Pharaoh." Moses obeys. He obeys God, and it gets worse. All of his fears are borne out in reality as Pharaoh stubbornly refuses. When obeying God makes things worse. That's stage 1, but that's just stage 1. It gets worse from there. Stage 2, Pharaoh's orders bricks without straw. Look at verse 6. That day, Pharaoh commanded the overseers of the people, as well as their foremen, "Don't continue to supply the people with straw for making bricks as before. They must go and gather straw for themselves, but require the same quota of bricks from them as they were when they were making it. Do not reduce it, for they are slackers. That is why they are crying out, 'Let us go and sacrifice to our God.' Impose heavier work on the men. Then they will be occupied with it and not pay attention to deceitful words." Obeying God makes things worse sometimes. We see that here. Not only does the initial conversation with Pharaoh not go well, but Pharaoh not only shuts them down, but he actually comes and makes their life more miserable. He withholds one of the key ingredients in the brick-making process from the people. Evidently, historically, what had happened before this time is that Pharaoh and the Egyptians would supply the Israelite workers, the Israelite enslaved people, with straw, which was an essential ingredient for making bricks. But now, not only do they have to do this work anyway, which is hard work, but now they have to do it with the added task of going gathering straw first and then making the same product with the same requirements, the same quota as before. You perhaps know what it's like to have your boss come to you at work and say, hey, we've had someone leave our company or leave our department. And you know what? I just need you to be a team player. I need you for a moment to do her job and yours. It'll be a short term, I promise. I've heard stories of that. I know that is a reality. It's never fun. It's basically saying, hey, we're going to heap extra burdens on you. You've got twice the work. We expect the same results. Never is that fair. That's what happens after Moses obeys God and goes to Pharaoh. But it gets worse. There's a stage 3. Not only does Pharaoh say no, not only does Pharaoh make extra burdens, but he holds the people accountable for the same quota. And when they don't do it, he has them beaten. Verse 10. So the overseers and the foremen of the people went out and said to them, this is what Pharaoh says. I'm not giving you straw. Go get the straw yourselves wherever you can find it, but there will be no reduction at all in your workload. So the people scattered throughout the land of Egypt to gather stubble for straw. The overseers insisted, finish your assigned work each day, just as you did when the straw was provided. Then the Israelite foremen, whose Pharaoh's slave drivers had set over them, were beaten. And they were asked, why haven't you finished making your prescribed number of bricks today, or today, as you did before? So we've got a number of people that's taking place in this passage. We've got Pharaoh, and then right under Pharaoh, you got another level of hierarchy. You've got Pharaoh, and then you've got the Egyptian foremen and overseers. Pharaoh and the Egyptian overseers and foremen. Then the Egyptian overseers and foremen, their job is to carry out Pharaoh's orders, so they go to the Israelite foremen. And the Israelite foremen, they're over all of the workers. So you got 4 levels in this hierarchy that we see in this passage. Pharaoh, Egyptian foreman, Israelite foreman. When the Egyptian foremen go to the Israelite foreman to enact these orders with accountability, the Israelite foremen, they are, we assume, doing the best they can. The Israelite workers, they're trying hard, and it's not possible. This is one of the awful realities of injustice and oppression, is that what's required, what's demanded is not physically possible. And when the Israelite workers, the lowest level, come to the Israelite foremen, they're held accountable for the lack of production. And so the Egyptian foremen end up wickedly beating and abusing the Israelite foremen. When obeying God makes things worse. But it keeps going. There's a stage 4. The Israelite foremen, after they are beaten and abused and mistreated because they couldn't do what was physically impossible to do, they, in desperation, cry out to Pharaoh. They have a meeting with Pharaoh, asking Pharaoh for mercy, begging him to change his mind. Pharaoh doesn't relent. Verse 15, so the Israelite foreman went in and cried for help for Pharaoh. Why are you treating your servants this way? No straw has been given to your servants. Yet they say to us, more bricks, make bricks. Look, your servants are being beaten, but it is your own people who are at fault. But Pharaoh said, you are slackers. This is why you're saying, let us go sacrifice to the Lord. Now get to work. No straw will be given to you, but you must produce the same quantity of bricks. Pharaoh is relentless. Pharaoh shows no mercy in this. Their one hope, the people's one hope, so they think, is that Pharaoh, this evil ruler, will somehow change his mind. But he is a wall. He is a rock. He will not move. Sometimes obeying God makes things worse. There's a 5th stage, though. Now let's shift to Moses and what he's thinking now. You got to remember Moses. Moses was a reluctant leader. He did not want this task. In fact, he fled from the land of Egypt originally after he murdered an Egyptian who was beating an Israelite. And at that time, after murdering the Egyptian, everyone became mad at Moses. The Israelites were mad at Moses, who they thought unjustly stepped in to try to lead them when they didn't ask for him to anyway. So the Israelites didn't like Moses, and the Egyptians didn't like Moses. Everyone hated Moses. And so he's an outcast. And as you can imagine, one of his great fears as he returns is having to face his people, both the Israelites and the Egyptians, all of whom hate him. This has to be a hard place for Moses to be. I don't know if you've been in a position where it feels like every people or everybody or multiple parties just can't stand you. You've let them down. They hate you. This is how Moses feels, even before this moment. Can you imagine how Moses feels, how responsible he feels when he sees what happens? He and Aaron go in with the best intentions. They're trying to obey God and they're trying to free the people, and they go in and they say the thing that they're supposed to say, and it's a train wreck. And then to have the Israelites, the very people that he loves, the very people that he's trying to help, come to him and say this thing. The Israelite foremen saw that they were in trouble when they were told, "You cannot reduce your daily quota of bricks." When they left Pharaoh, they confronted Moses and Aaron, who stood waiting to meet them. And here's what they said: "May the Lord take note of you and judge," they said to him, "because you have made us reek to Pharaoh and his officials, putting a sword in their hand to kill us." Can you imagine the weight that Moses is feeling right now? He's trying to help, and all that happens is more pain. When obeying God makes things worse. I hope you can appreciate the heaviness that is in this passage, because there were real men, women, and children who were involved in this time, who had real hurts, real pains, real experiences of sorrow, real experiences of oppression. Moses had to carry this heaviness. He was obeying God, and yet things kept getting worse. Well, here's one key question that we have to ask ourselves. How does Moses respond to this disappointment and pain? This is the key question. And it's a question not just for Moses, but it's a key question for us. How do you respond to disappointment and pain in your life? Because you may or may not know this, but you have some strategies for handling pain in your life. You developed this at an early age, but you have some strategies, I promise. Counselors and psychiatrists and therapists will call these coping mechanisms. These are ways that you have learned, if I am feeling pain, then if I do this, it gets better. And there's a wide variety of possibilities with varying degrees of success, varying degrees of goodness to them. Some things you do are harmful and will make things worse. So when things get painful, you drown your sorrows in alcohol or drugs, pornography, any kind of illicit behavior. Not only is it dishonoring to the Lord, but it's making things worse for you and those around you. It numbs your pain in a moment, but it compounds your pain over the course of your lifetime. How does Moses respond to disappointment and pain? We see in this passage, Moses cries out to God in prayer. Verse 22, so Moses went back to the Lord and asked, "Lord, why have you caused trouble for this people, and why did you ever send me? Ever since I went into Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has caused trouble for this people, and you haven't rescued your people at all." Did you notice this prayer? how honest it is, how direct it is. He does not hold back. He cries out in lament. I want to zoom back for a second. I want us to think about this entire passage. The entire chapter that Amy read and that we're talking through right now. It is basically a series of conversations. I don't know if you noticed this, but it's a series of conversations. Conversation 1, Moses and Aaron address Pharaoh. They go to Pharaoh and they talk to Pharaoh. First 5 verses. And then Pharaoh addresses the Egyptian foreman. That's the second section. And then the third conversation is the Egyptian foremen have a conversation with the Israelite foreman. And then after being beaten, the fourth conversation is the Israelite foreman address Pharaoh. And then the fifth conversation, the Israelite foreman address Moses and Aaron. And then finally, and this is why I want to show you this, finally in the culmination of this passage, the build-up to the passage, the most important part of the passage, the most important conversation in the passage, Moses addresses God. Family, Moses' prayer is the high point of this passage. It is the key, it is the end game, everything builds to it. Moses' prayer is where God does the internal work with Moses. This prayer keeps him going, it changes him, it strengthens him, it grows him, it transforms him. Family, this is the key point, the key encouragement, the key takeaway. In your pain, cry out to the Lord. And here's the reality, and we see this all throughout Scripture. Painful prayer is powerful prayer. Painful prayer is powerful prayer. The difference in painful prayer and then drowning your sorrows in anything that will numb you for the moment, it's the same difference between Peter and Judas. What you think about this? Peter and Judas, after Jesus died, both of them, in a sense, did the exact same thing. Both of them betrayed Jesus. Judas betrayed Jesus, sold Jesus out to the religious leaders. Peter denied Jesus 3 times in his moment of need after he promised he would never do such a thing. Both of them did the same thing. But the difference is what happened next. In his pain, Peter ran to Jesus. Whereas in his pain, Judas ran away. And the result is that in his sorrow, overwhelming shame, Judas, who ran away from Jesus in that moment of pain, he committed suicide. But Peter, who ran to Jesus, was reinstated, was loved, was strengthened, was forgiven, was comforted, and given a new mission to lead now in a more powerful way because he experienced the forgiveness of Jesus in a more powerful way. Painful prayer is powerful prayer. Moses cries out to God in prayer. Lord, why have you caused us trouble for your people? Why did you ever send me? Ever since I went into Pharaoh to speak your name, he has caused trouble for this people, and you haven't rescued your people at all. Family, I wished we live in a world where there was no pain, there was no disappointments. I wish that was reality. I look forward to heaven where that will be the case. But the reality is, as much as I want to avoid pain and disappointment, here's the truth. Pain and disappointments are the warning lights on the dashboard of our heart, reminding us to move towards Jesus. Reminding us to cry out to God in prayer. Family, what happens in your life when you experience a disappointment? Maybe it is a disappointment because you obeyed God and you expected it to go differently. Maybe something in your life happens circumstantially that is different than what you expected, and it feels like God has let you down. Maybe someone else you feel like let you down. How you experience disappointment in life says a whole lot about you and your relationship with Jesus. Disappointment is a great revealer for us of what we're trusting in. One of the ways that God matures us and grows us and sanctifies us is by teaching us to lay down our other impulses, the coping strategies that you've learned in your life to manage your pain and disappointment, to lay that down, to drop those tools, and instead to run to Jesus, cry out to him in prayer. I want to give you a final encouragement as we sort of wrap up this time. How does praying in pain transform us? Okay? If painful prayer is powerful prayer, how so? Like, what does it do? None of us want to experience pain. Number one, praying in pain grows our trust. You better believe that as Moses trusted God when things were discouraging, when things did not go the way he wanted them to, and yet he persevered, what he found was what happens next is that God is still faithful. Even in the midst of the disappointment, God is still faithful. God didn't leave him. God didn't abandon him. Praying in pain grows our trust. I shared some of the ways in which we've experienced, pain over the last 4 years and just the challenges of ministry. And there have been moments when, we were trying to church plant in the middle of a pandemic. It's painful. And then when we realized, part of this church plant strategy involved 2 separate mergers. So much pain. And yet, as we continued to pray and wrestle with the Lord and move forward with the Lord, our trust grew. One of the things that you see as you pray in pain and you wait to see what God does is that you start to become more confident that God is who he says he is and he will do what he says he will do. Because if you've experienced God's faithfulness in your life, when you've persevered, you've pushed through the hard things where it seems like God isn't there, but you trust him anyway, you trust his word anyway, and then if you wait long enough, you will see him come through. So what happens is if you've experienced that once, twice, 3 times, a dozen times in your life, the very next time it happens, it can become a little easier to trust. You become just a little more resilient. You have a little bit more strength to persevere because you've seen God's faithfulness in your past. Praying in pain grows our trust. Secondly, praying in pain grows our love, particularly our love for God. I can remember many times over the last 4 years coming out here and really being really excited, for example, to do ministry with 2 of my best friends, Drew and Charles. So excited to come out here and join them for the long haul in ministry. And yet God had a different plan. To multiply the kingdom work that Charles McKnight, Charlotte McKnight, Drew Martin, and Meg Martin are doing in different places. In those moments of pain where I am feeling like the disappointment, I came out here to be with them and I'm not with them anymore. And in those moments, I hear the Lord speak to me, not audibly, but in my mind and through scripture and through conversations. David, I can be enough for you if you'll let me. In times when church ministry and ministry efforts don't go the way that I think they should, or everything is slower than I want it to be, and disappointments creep in, I hear, again, the voice of the Lord asking me this question, David, am I enough for you? Because I can be if you'll let me. When other things fall down in your life and you realize the one constant is Jesus Christ, in those moments, there's a potential for your love for him to grow, for him to be more significant in your life. Even the Israelites, if we were to press the fast forward button and we zoom ahead 100 years, the Israelites are in the promised land. They're where they wanted to be. And yet it's really not the promised land. It's good, but it's not ultimate. What they really need is God's presence with them. That is the promised land. That is the goal. That is our heart's cry. Praying in pain grows our love. But finally, praying in pain grows our hope. Praying in pain grows our hope. I never say this out loud. I wouldn't be so bold as to state this or even to think this because I know it's not true. But ultimately what I'm saying as I'm desiring, all of the things to happen and all of my check boxes for ministry on the west side, what I'm ultimately saying in my mind and in my heart is I want heaven to come to earth right now in West Charlotte. I want heaven to come to earth in this city. I want heaven to come to earth in my home. I want heaven to come to earth in our community. And again, I hear the Lord reminding me again and again through Scripture, not yet. Not yet. The Bible tells us so clearly, and it's so hard, and I forget it daily. I forget it moment to moment. This world is not our home. This world is not our home. We are strangers and aliens sojourning through a foreign land. And when you experience the disappointments because your family is not what you want it to be, your life stage is not where you wanted it to be right now, your relationships with your friends, your parents, your children is not what you wanted it to be right now, your hopes for other people in your life is not what you wanted it to be right now, your hopes for your nation, it's not what you wanted it to be right now, and you think, how could this be? And you look around to yourself, your family, your church, your city, your nation with just utter disappointment that this is where we are. I pray that you will hear the voice of Jesus calling to you in those moments. This is not your home. But I am here, and I can be enough for you. Family, painful prayer is powerful prayer. When you experience pain and disappointment in life, in what direction do you run? I pray you hear with crystal clarity today the voice of the Spirit calling you to run to Jesus again and again and again. But I've got even better news. When you don't run to him in your pain and disappointment, he runs to you. He will not let you go. And that is why he died on the cross. For all the times that you have chosen these other sinful, destructive coping mechanisms, sinful behaviors to try to numb the pain in your life, for all of the times that you have done, are doing, and perhaps even will do. This is why Jesus died for you. Family, our pain and our disappointment are a reminder not only to come to Jesus, but it's a reminder that Jesus has already come to you. Let's pray.